Hi, David Bryan here with ShopBot Tools. I'm checking in to introduce myself as the first part of the video series I'll be putting together over the coming weeks. Since many of us are probably working from home in light of recommendations to keep our social distance, we at ShopBot thought it might be helpful to reduce some of that social distance by inviting you into our shops for a little virtual peek, show and tell. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about where I come from, my background, how I got to where I am now. Um, my first job out of college was actually as a museum exhibit designer and fabricator for a local science center. And that was a great position and very hands-on, very much in line with my interests. I worked on a wide variety of projects, everything from electronics to woodworking, some metalworking, some of the example sorts of projects, did some camera controls that would allow visitors to peek into some animal habitats. We had bears and red wolves and lemurs, and so we hooked up some camera controls and monitors so that when the animals weren't particularly active or visible, visitors could get their hands on a little joystick and control a camera and try to find those animals in their pseudo-natural habitats. I also built a fleet of remote control sailboats that was a fairly interesting project. Built wings for a Da Vinci inspired ornithopter, a flying machine, very cool project. So I had a great mentor at that museum and ultimately led me into a graduate program in industrial design. Eventually, we got into the computer side of things in the latter part of my first year. And so I learned some basic 2D layout and design, things in the Adobe suite, and that really was interesting to me. But where I really got super hooked was when we got into the 3D CAD stuff. So the first program I ever used was Rhino, and to this day that is my number one most favorite piece of software for designing a project. Just it's super intuitive, and probably just because it's the first thing I ever learned. This was just a super exciting time for me in my sort of early days figuring out the CAD stuff. So a little bit later on in that school journey, I took some classes that were workshop based. So one of them was a sort of general shop class, metal and wood, plastic, all the sort of typical stuff that you'd expect in a fabrication shop. And I had an incredible instructor named Brian Lafitte in that course. He was actually the chair of the graduate studies at that time. He's the person who actually admitted me to the school, and truly, Brian Lafitte, just my spirit animal overall. This guy really could do it all. I learned so much from him. And then sort of the next class, I think, really got things started for me, where I took a chair design and fabrication class, and so it's interesting. The instructor for this class wanted us to do this all the traditional way. So I had noticed at one point that the shop back off in a corner, really a closet, there was a big blue machine that said ShopBot on it, and it was clear that that was the machine that this instructor wanted us to avoid, so that we could learn sort of the traditional techniques of how furniture was made. But I was too interested in what this big blue ShopBot did that I figured out a way to fulfill the requirements of the project, but also to integrate the ShopBot. So I ultimately made a laminated bent wood ply rocking chair. And so the ShopBot was used to make the mold. And so my argument was it was a pretty indirect use. And I ended up, for the arms and rockers, roughed all that out with bandsaw, cut all my mortises and spline joints on my own, and so was able to fulfill the requirements of the class, but also got my first real taste of using the ShopBot, and really that's the beginning of all of this for me, which has been now this long journey of going deeper and deeper down the ShopBot rabbit hole. So fast forward, finished up that program, school program, and landed my first job as a museum exhibit designer fabricator. So I got to add that designer side to the position where I was not just building other people's ideas, I got to contribute my ideas and then build collaboratively. Ultimately, what led me to that position was that this was a museum who actually had a ShopBot and built everything in-house. And being a part of a two-person team meant that I got to use it every single day as much as I wanted. And this is where I got just the sort of foundation of my experience. But I had enough ShopBot knowledge that I was able to sort of weasel my way in the door, and they needed some help at the time with tech support. So I spent half or a little more of half of my time fielding phone calls from existing ShopBot owners. And because I had so much hands-on experience with it and knew some of the potential pitfalls, I could talk people over the phone into the solutions for their problems. So super interesting, informative, part of my early ShopBot career, where I was able to sort of peek into the shops of all these different makers and find out what are the problems they're having, what's working for them, what's not working for them. And so the other, half or maybe a little less than half of my time was spent on product R&D. So I was given a few little projects at first, and was able to just sort of get my feet wet with actual product design, whereas before I was doing the museum stuff. It's sort of a different deal when making one of something versus needing to like mass produce objects. So nowadays I'm doing mostly training. So I do in-house training where folks, new ShopBot owners, maybe existing ShopBot owners who have new employees, will come to us, and I'll lead them through a 2-day training, our basic training, where learn all the things you need to know to use your machine. And another part of my time these days is actually spent where I will go to customer sites. So particularly for our 5-axis customers, they're often in need of sort of getting the tool up and running immediately in the context of the thing that they make. So rather than them coming to us, I go to them. Usually I'll get some files in advance that describe whatever the objects that they manufacture are. So we do a lot of aerospace companies. We do just super broad sculpture departments at universities. The list goes on and on. So another interesting sort of peek into the world of how things are made is getting to go into these people's factories and show them how to efficiently set up their machine and create a production workflow. What I want to do next is, in sort of these future episodes, I'm going to show you a little tour of my home workspace. And then moving forward from there, we'll get into some cutting projects and figure out some ways to keep folks entertained who might be stuck at home, hopefully that have a ShopBot, or maybe if you're thinking about one, maybe this will help you start planning projects, things like that.